St. Anne Police. If you're in here, anybody come out.
Police!
We got a third down in the living room.
The room felt quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. This was the kind that lingers after something has already gone terribly wrong. A newborn, just 7 weeks into life, lay fighting for breaths he couldn't hold on to, while outside that fragile moment, decisions were being made that would soon unravel into something far darker. What should have been a story about first smiles and sleepless nights quickly turned into a timeline filled with confusion, delay, and choices that now sit at the center of a growing investigation. And as each detail surfaces, the weight of what happened becomes harder and harder to ignore. What investigators began piecing together in the hours that followed painted a timeline that doesn't just raise questions, it forces you to sit with them. Because when you slow everything down, moment by moment, what unfolds isn't just tragic, it's deeply unsettling. According to the affidavit, everything seems ordinary at first. A young father, 21-year-old Mark Clammer, feeding his 7-week-old son. 4 ounces of formula, then a little more later. The baby gets fussy, something any parent would recognize as normal. Nothing about that moment signals what's about to come next. But then, in his own account, Clammer describes picking the baby up in frustration. Not gently, not carefully. He demonstrates a forward and back jerking motion, something he himself later admits was rough. In that instant, the baby's head snaps backward, a movement so forceful that even recalling it later, he acknowledges it wasn't right. And yet, what follows is even harder to process. When asked how the baby looked after that moment, Clammer reportedly says the child seemed normal. Not crying, just quiet. To him, it looked like the baby was getting sleepy. But in cases involving infants, silence isn't always comfort. Sometimes, it's the first warning sign that something is already very wrong. Not long after, the baby's mother, 19-year-old Alyssa Vanderbeck, wakes up. Instead of urgency, instead of immediate concern, what happens next introduces a delay that investigators would later focus on heavily. The couple places the baby in a bouncer and brings him into the bathroom while they take a shower together. It's in that setting, steam filling the room, water running, that subtle signs begin to appear. When they step out, Vanderbeck notices something isn't right. The baby's breathing looks abnormal. His eyes, not tracking normally, one partially open, the other not responding the same way. It's the kind of moment that, for any parent, should trigger immediate panic. And to an extent, it does, but not in the way you'd expect. Instead of calling emergency services right away, Vanderbeck begins recording videos, multiple videos. In them, according to investigators, the baby is visibly in distress, struggling to breathe, making unusual movements, showing signs that medical professionals later describe as critical. These aren't subtle symptoms. These are clear indicators that something is seriously wrong. And yet, time continues to pass. There's an attempt to wake the baby, physically stimulating him, even shaking him again in panic. A reaction that might come from fear, but one that, medically speaking, only risks making things worse. At one point, Vanderbeck even forces the baby's eyes open, trying to get a response. Still, no 911 call. Instead, she reaches out to friends and family, sends messages, shares videos, as if searching for reassurance that this might not be as serious as it looks, as if hoping someone else will say the words that make it all less frightening. Meanwhile, Clammer believes it could be something minor, gas. He spends time trying to burp the baby, 10 minutes, holding on to the idea that this is something simple, something fixable. He even expresses confidence in his own instincts, saying that usually when something seems wrong, it turns out fine. But this time, it isn't. Eventually, as the baby's condition fails to improve, Clammer contacts a triage nurse. That call itself takes time, navigating an automated system, waiting, explaining. By the time he's told to call 911, more minutes have already slipped away. And when investigators later reconstruct the timeline using phone records, videos, and statements, one detail stands out above all. Nearly an hour may have passed from the moment the baby first showed clear signs of distress to the moment emergency services were finally called. An hour. In a medical emergency involving an infant, that window can mean everything. When first responders finally arrive, the situation is already critical. The baby is rushed to the hospital, where doctors begin fighting to save his life. But what they discover during medical evaluation, others older, subdural hemorrhages, retinal bleeding, signs of brain injury caused by lack of oxygen, and perhaps most concerning, rib fractures in various stages of healing. injuries that suggest this may not have been an isolated incident. Doctors recognize a pattern, one consistent with what's known as abusive head trauma, a type of injury caused by violent acceleration and deceleration. It's the kind of diagnosis that immediately shifts a case from tragic to criminal. Back at the hospital, law enforcement begins interviewing both parents separately. The baby dies. And just like that, what started as a medical emergency becomes a homicide investigation. But even then, the story doesn't stop unfolding. Because as detectives continue digging, reviewing digital evidence, social media activity, timelines, they come across something that adds another layer of shock to an already devastating case. A video, posted online, filmed inside the hospital room, and what it shows only raises more questions about everything that led up to this moment. And just when it feels like the timeline couldn't grow any more disturbing, that video changes everything. Investigators uncover a TikTok clip allegedly recorded by the baby's mother while her son was still in the hospital, fighting for his life. In it, she's seen slowly dancing, music playing in the background, inside the very room where machines were working to keep her newborn alive. It's the kind of detail that doesn't just surprise people, it unsettles them, because it introduces a contrast that's almost impossible to reconcile. On one side, a child in critical condition. On the other, behavior that prosecutors may argue reflects detachment, or something even harder to explain. Now, legally speaking, that video opens up an entirely new dimension. Prosecutors could attempt to use it to establish a state of mind, a depraved or reckless indifference to what was happening. But the defense, just as quickly, could push back. They may argue that grief doesn't look the same for everyone, that people process trauma differently, that what seems inappropriate to one person could, in another context, be a coping mechanism. And that's where this case becomes more than just a sequence of events. It becomes a battle of interpretation. Because in court, it's not enough to show what happened. You have to prove how and why it happened, beyond a reasonable doubt. Following the child's death, both parents are arrested. The father, Mark Clammer, is taken into custody the same day the baby passes. Second-degree murder, with aggravating factors, including one that stands out above all, a vulnerable victim. In this case, a 7-week-old infant who had no ability to protect himself, no voice to explain what happened, only medical evidence left behind to tell that story. Both parents are held on $1 million bail. Prosecutors also make it clear that the charges could escalate further, because those rib fractures, found in different stages of healing, suggest a pattern. Not a single moment, but potentially repeated harm over time. And if that's proven, the case could move into even more severe territory, homicide by abuse, which carries consequences that could mean life in prison. But even with all of this, there are still unanswered questions. What exactly happened in those moments before the injuries? How much did each parent know? And perhaps most critically, can the prosecution prove, with certainty, who is responsible for what? Because when two people are involved, cases like this often take a strategic turn. Prosecutors may try to flip one against the other, offering a deal in exchange for testimony. It's a calculated move, but often one of the most effective ways to establish a clear narrative when there are no direct witnesses. At the same time, the defense has its own path. They may focus on the idea of inexperience, a way to humanize the defendants in front of a jury. And then there's the medical debate. While many experts agree that violent shaking can cause catastrophic injury in infants, some defense teams challenge that conclusion. They bring in specialists who argue alternative explanations, pre-existing conditions, accidental causes, uncertainties in diagnosis. It doesn't have to fully convince every juror. It just has to create doubt. Because in a courtroom, doubt changes everything. One juror hesitates, and the entire outcome can shift. What strengthens the prosecution's case, however, is the delay. That window of time, when the baby was clearly in distress, yet emergency services weren't immediately called. Prosecutors may frame that as more than hesitation, as awareness, as a sign that something was already wrong, and instead of acting, time was lost. And in cases like this, time is everything. As it stands, both parents are scheduled to return to court for further proceedings, where more evidence will be presented, more arguments made, and more of the truth, whatever that may be, will begin to surface. But even now, before any verdict is reached, one reality remains unchanged. A life that had barely begun is gone. And everything else, every argument, every strategy, every legal maneuver, now exists in the shadow of that fact. This case isn't just about what happened. It's about how small decisions, moments of hesitation, and actions taken or not taken can collide in ways that can never be undone. And as more details come out, the picture may become clearer, or it may become even more complicated. But what do you think? Do the actions described here point to panic and inexperience, or something far more serious? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And if you want more real cases broken down like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.